Story 1. This memory from my childhood has stuck with me for years, and even now, it sends a chill down my spine. I must have been around 7 or 8 years old at the time. Normally, my mom would take my brother and me trick-or-treating on Halloween. But that year, things were different. After school, instead of taking us out herself, my mom dropped me off at my friend Mike's house. The plan was for Mike, our mutual friend Eric, and me to go trick-or-treating together. Eric and Mike were both a year older than me, and we had become friends playing outside in the neighborhood. They lived just a block over from where I did. Mike's home life always seemed a little unusual to me. He had a much older sister. She was probably in her early 20s, and there was this big gap between them that I never really understood. She was more like his caretaker than anything else, and she never really paid me much attention when I was over. Their house always smelled faintly of cats, and there always seemed to be some guy visiting his sister. I never met Mike's dad, and his mom seemed to be working out of town most of the time. I only saw her a couple of times, so I never pieced together the full story. Anyway, after my mom dropped me off, I went inside to find Eric already there. We were all armed with big pillowcases ready to be filled with as much candy as possible. That was when I learned that neither Mike's mom nor his sister would be coming along with us. I was young, so the idea of going out without an adult made me a bit nervous, but at the same time, I felt a buzz of excitement. Of course, I knew my mom would never have approved, but I pushed that thought aside as we headed out. The three of us wandered the neighborhood, stopping at every house that had its lights on. It did not take long for people to ask where our parents were. Eric always had a quick answer ready, lying that his mom and sister were just ahead of us. The excuse worked every time. We started trick-or-treating around 5 in the evening since it was a Friday, and we planned to stay out until our pillowcases were completely stuffed. We took a break a couple of hours in and headed back to Mike's house. He heated up some frozen pizzas, and we sat around eating and watching Halloween specials on Nickelodeon. For a moment, I envied the freedom Mike seemed to have in his house, but looking back now, I am so grateful for my own strict and loving parents. Eric's mom came to pick him up after a while, but Mike and I decided we were not done yet. It was already dark, probably past 8, but we grabbed our pillowcases and went back out for round 2. The streets were quieter by then, with far fewer trick-or-treaters. We tried hitting some streets we had not visited earlier, venturing further away from Mike's house. On one quieter block, we noticed a man walking a few houses behind us. He was pushing a stroller and moving slowly in our direction. At first, we thought nothing of it, just another dad out with his kid. But as we moved from house to house, he got closer. Then we heard him making soft, shh sounds and singing quietly. When he finally caught up to us, he asked how our night was going. We both replied, "Good," almost in unison. The man told us it was getting late and that he was heading back to his house. Then he said he had a bunch of leftover candy he could give us. At the mention of free candy, Mike and I exchanged glances, our excitement barely contained. Mike asked what kind of candy he had, and the man said he had all sorts of things in bags. He explained he had not given much away because he took his daughter out trick-or-treating instead. He pointed to the bag hanging from the stroller handle as proof. The stroller's canopy was pulled down, so we could not see the baby, but he told us she was asleep and that he did not want to wake her. The man gestured ahead, saying his house was just up the block, and invited us to follow him. Something about the situation made me uneasy, but I said nothing and trailed behind as Mike eagerly walked ahead. The man made small talk, asking us where we were from and what school we went to. I let Mike do most of the talking, figuring he was older and better at handling these things. Every now and then, the man would lean into the stroller, cooing at his daughter in a high-pitched voice before turning back to smile at us. When we got to his house, he unlocked the door and brought the stroller inside. Then he invited us in, saying he would grab the candy bags. Mike stepped inside first, and I reluctantly followed. The man pushed the stroller into the living room, parked it about 10 feet away from where we were standing, and disappeared down a hallway. The whole thing felt off. I whispered to Mike, asking why the candy would be so far away if he knew he was going to give it to us. Mike did not answer. Instead, he walked toward the stroller, lifted the canopy, and froze. His expression turned to one of pure shock. "We need to go. Now," he whispered, his voice trembling. Without another word, he bolted for the door. I hesitated for half a second before following, struggling to keep up with my heavy pillowcase weighing me down. Once we were outside, I asked what he had seen, but before he could answer, a woman's voice called out. "Excuse me, boys," she said, hurrying toward us. She explained that she was the man's neighbor and had seen us go into his house. "Do you know him?" she asked. That is when Mike spilled everything. How he had offered us candy and that he was pushing a stroller with a fake baby inside. Hearing those words gave me goosebumps. The woman's face turned serious. "That man does not have a child," she said. "I saw him walking around earlier." She insisted on driving us home, and even though the idea of getting into another stranger's car made me uneasy, we agreed. She dropped me off first and spoke to my mom at the door, explaining everything we had told her. After she left, my mom called me into the living room. I told her every detail of what had happened that night. She was furious and terrified, sending me to my room while she called the police. I never found out what happened to that man, or if anything came of the police report. My mom refused to let me go to Mike's house after that, and made sure his mom knew exactly how she felt about the whole situation. Mike and I saw each other at school occasionally, but our friendship was never the same. That night changed everything. Story 2. It was Halloween night in 2016, and my parents had tasked me with handing out candy to all the trick-or-treaters. My mom, as usual, had gone overboard and bought what felt like 1,000,000 bags of candy. I knew most of it would end up sitting around for weeks, and I'd be the one reluctantly snacking on it while trying to stick to my diet. I always told her she bought way too much, but she never listened. We lived in a cul-de-sac at the end of a dead-end street. It was not the most popular spot for trick-or-treaters, but we had a few loyal families who came every year, knowing we gave out generous portions. This year, Halloween fell on a Monday. I was in college at the time and had the day off, so I spent my morning at the gym and the afternoon working on assignments. Around 4 p.m., I started hearing the unmistakable sounds of kids outside, signaling the start of the trick-or-treating. The first doorbell ring came between 4 o'clock and 5 p.m. The evening unfolded as expected. Nothing special about handing out candy to excited kids while my dog, Vito, barked like crazy every time the doorbell rang. Vito was a tiny rat terrier with a bark far bigger than his size. By the time the clock hit 8 p.m., we had maybe 10 or 15 trick-or-treaters total, which was about average for our quiet neighborhood. I finished some homework, had a bowl of my mom's leftover stew, and then went in my room to watch some Game of Thrones. I was a couple of episodes in when I heard the doorbell ring unexpectedly. It was about 9:30 p.m., well past the usual cutoff for trick-or-treaters. Vito, of course, started barking again. I headed downstairs to see who it was, and when I opened the door, I saw a tall man in a clown costume standing on the other side of the storm door. His mask was terrifying, and he was holding a brown sack that looked nearly empty. I could tell it was a man from his build. He was huge, definitely not a kid or even a teenager. I did not open the storm door. Instead, I said through the glass, "Sorry, we're out of candy," and then slammed the door shut. I locked it immediately, my heart racing. I regretted opening the door in the first place. I had thought it might be a parent trying to get in some last-minute trick-or-treating with their kids, but this person was definitely not that. I hovered near the door, listening to see if he would leave, but instead of footsteps, I heard the doorbell ring again. Vito started barking like crazy once more. I picked him up and carried him upstairs, turning off all the lights downstairs as I went. I put him in my room and shut the door, hoping he would stop barking. Then I waited at the top of the stairs, listening. Moments later, I heard a loud snap. The latch on the storm door had been forced open. This was followed by knocking on the front door and the sound of the doorknob jiggling. My stomach dropped. Panicked, I ran back to my room and locked the door. I texted my family group chat about what was happening, but no one responded. I considered texting my guy friends to ask if they were pulling some kind of prank, but none of my friends were tall enough to match the build of the person at the door. I tried to focus on my show, but I was too anxious. Then, the doorbell rang again. This was turning into a nightmare. I tried calling my dad, but he did not pick up. I called my brother next. He answered but was clearly preoccupied, probably with a girl. I told him about the clown at the door, and he brushed it off as a Halloween prank, telling me to ignore it. Annoyed and still scared, I hung up. I hoped he was right and that it was just some stupid joke. After a few minutes of silence, I started to relax a little. I turned off the TV and lay back in bed, eventually drifting off to sleep. I woke up to the sound of Vito growling and quietly barking. He was staring at the window. I tried to hush him, but he would not stop. I listened carefully and heard a faint thumping sound, along with what I could swear was something rubbing against the glass. My bedroom was on the second floor, so I thought it had to be the wind or maybe a tree branch. Still, I got up to check. When I pushed the blinds aside, my heart nearly stopped. The man in the clown costume was standing outside my window, his horrific mask staring right at me. He tilted his head in a slow, unsettling way. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and Vito finally barked in response. I ran out of my room, slamming the door behind me, and locked myself in my parents' bedroom. Shaking, I called 911. I could barely get the words out as I explained the situation to the operator. My hands were trembling so much I almost dropped my phone. I kept begging them to hurry, and they assured me the police were on their way. Those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. When the police finally arrived, they searched the exterior of the house. They found the latch on the storm door broken and my dad's ladder leaning against the side of the house beneath my bedroom window. The man had gone into our shed, taken the ladder, and climbed up to my window. To this day, I do not know if it was just a sick Halloween prank, or if something far worse was about to happen. I ended up staying at my friend Adam's house that night. The whole experience left me shaken, and every Halloween since then, I have been on edge whenever the doorbell rings after dark. Story 3. It was late October, a Saturday on Halloween weekend. Halloween itself fell on a Tuesday that year, so the big party night was the preceding Saturday. My friends and I were scrambling for last-minute plans since all the usual spots were sold out. Ideally, we wanted to find a house party. We had hilarious costumes that we were eager to show off and put to good use. Kate, one of my friends, took the initiative and posted on her Instagram and Snapchat stories asking if anyone knew of any parties that night. I thought it was a little bold and maybe even embarrassing, but I was glad she was willing to do it. Surprisingly, she got a response pretty quickly. She texted our group chat with a screenshot of the details. The message included an address, a start time, and some ground rules. The party was strictly indoors, no backyard access, and it was bring your own drinks. The invite also said every guy had to bring at least one girl. The guy who sent the details to Kate was someone we vaguely knew, a mutual acquaintance who often showed up at the same events. He assured her that a lot of people we knew would be there. The house was just one town over, which made it super convenient. We decided to meet up at Shauna's house to pregame since her parents were out of town. For about an hour, we took our time getting ready, doing our makeup, and sipping on drinks. We had everything from White Claws to vodka shooters. Once our guy friends confirmed they were heading over to the party, we called an Uber. The driver probably had his fill of our loud, tipsy chatter by the time we arrived. The house was impressive, with a spacious front yard and cars parked up and down the street. It was dimly lit, with orange Halloween lights giving it a spooky party vibe. We could hear the thump of bass as we approached the door. Inside, it was packed, but weirdly, we didn't recognize a single face. Kate texted our guy friends to see if they had arrived yet. A man who looked to be in his 50s approached us and introduced himself as John, saying he was Luke's dad. Luke was apparently the one hosting the party. I asked where Luke was and what school he went to. John waved it off, saying, "Oh, he's around here somewhere. You'll meet him." He then asked if we wanted to put our drinks in one of the coolers. We followed him to the kitchen, where 3 large coolers were already filled with ice and drinks. The whole thing felt a little strange. John seemed way too invested in a college-age party. He was overly welcoming and chatty, especially with the girls. Still, we brushed it off and went to play beer pong at one of the tables. Some random guys joined us, and things felt more normal for a while. Not long after, John shouted our names from the kitchen, holding up shot glasses and yelling, "Shots!" My friends Shauna and Tracy looked annoyed that he only called for Kate and me. I asked if we could all have one, and he waved us over, saying, "Of course." We reluctantly joined him at the counter and took shots of tequila. It was awful. No lime, no salt, just straight burn. By this point, I was definitely feeling buzzed. John kept hovering. He asked what our favorite drinks were and started making cocktails for us. It felt odd but harmless at the time. We went back to the beer pong table, and soon, John reappeared with red Solo cups, handing out drinks he'd made. I took a sip of mine, a vodka soda, but drank it slowly since I was already tipsy. The guys we had been playing with earlier were still hanging around, so we continued socializing. At some point, I noticed my phone battery was low and plugged it into an outlet by the wall. When I went back to check it later, it hadn't charged at all. The outlet must not have been working. I did not want to leave my phone unattended anywhere else, so I decided to save what little battery I had left. Our guy friends finally showed up, which was a relief. But not long after, everything started to blur. One moment, I was laughing and talking with our friend Jeff, and the next, I was completely out of it. The last thing I remembered was feeling my head spinning and struggling to stay awake. Then, darkness. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the back seat of a car outside my house. My friends were shaking me awake. I felt woozy and disoriented. One of the guys helped me to my front door before leaving. Once inside, I stumbled to my room, feeling an unsettling mix of dizziness and nausea that I had never experienced from drinking before. When I checked my phone, I saw text from an unknown number. My stomach dropped as I opened them. The first message was me, drunkenly texting my name to someone. The replies were from John, saying things like, "You look so cute," and later, "Where did my favorite girls go?" There was a 2-hour gap before he texted again, saying, "I'm at your house. Can you come to the door?" He followed up with, "Hello, are you awake?" and even tried calling me several times. I felt sick. I had no memory of giving him my number. When I showed the text to my friends the next morning, they filled in the gaps. Apparently, as I got more out of it, John had been hovering around me more and more. My friends became concerned and decided to leave the party. As we were leaving, 2 police cars pulled up, likely for a noise complaint. That was when they noticed something strange. The house had no furniture. It was completely empty except for the party setup. One of our guy friends later looked up John's number and discovered it was a fake voice-over IP number. He explained that with my phone number, John could potentially find my address. Panic set in. We all decided to go to the police and report what happened. At the station, an officer mentioned that the house we were at had been reported as vacant for months. Apparently, John had no connection to the property. He had advertised the party to lure people there, especially young women. To this day, I do not know what his true intentions were, but the thought of it still makes my skin crawl. The police took down our statements, but we have not heard anything since. I am terrified knowing that this man is likely still out there, capable of trying something like this again. If there is any silver lining, it is that my friends acted quickly to get me out of there before anything worse happened.